Hello, everyone. My name is Chrisman. Good morning and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, let's go through some of the housekeeping items. I would like to request you all to mute your audio during the presentation. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat box. We will be responding to the questions at the end of the session. Your questions will be answered in the sequential order, and if we were unable to get to any of your questions, we will send a response to them and separate in an email. We will also be recording the session and we'll share it with all the attendees. For today's masterclass, which is about how to optimize deal value in M&A integration with O2C automations, I would like to invite John Selleck, our speaker for today's masterclass. John, over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone. Another good program for you today. A lot of information in 30 minutes here, but we'll cover it all. And it's a very interesting subject. When you think of mergers and acquisitions, the real hard work starts once the deal is signed, and then there's some integration combination of the two companies. And that's done to realize the synergies of combining the two companies, which is really the reason and the financial justification for doing the merger or doing the acquisition. So we'll introduce the topic and we'll go right into value creation or destruction in M&A. And the reason I'm smiling is it can go bad. And I've seen it, got some interesting examples. But then, let's focus primarily on the role of order to cash in the success or underperformance. Don't necessarily want to say failure, but underperformance of the combined company. When you think of combining two companies, you need to integrate and coordinate all the processes: sales, marketing, production, order fulfillment, HR, finance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But surprisingly, the order to cash process plays a very, very important role in the success of an integration, particularly in the early days. And then we'll talk about how automation can contribute to a successful M&A integration, share with you some case studies, wrap up by encapsulating the benefits with a conclusion, give you some takeaways, and then answer any questions you might have. All right. Just set the table here, so to speak, with the introduction. Mergers and acquisitions, the fastest way to grow revenue a lot. Acquire the company, and once the combination is consummated, you own the revenue of the acquired company, and you report it as your own. So nice idea, and many companies have grown tremendously with acquisitions or mergers. But integrating the two companies is difficult. A recent Deloitte study concluded that 30% of combined companies did not meet the growth objectives that they set and that were used to justify the merger or acquisition. And that's 30% not meeting growth objectives. I would say a much higher percentage don't meet the financial returns that were projected as well. Just think about it. The operations of the two companies need to be more integrated, and it's all the operations. And when the finance team evaluates the success or lack of success of a merger or integration, several years after it's been the two companies have been combined and up and running. You know, they look at how did the combined company perform compared to the projections. And of course, they use discounted cash flow techniques, which places a real premium on the results in year 1 or 2 after integration. So any slow start, slip up in those early days can really impact the evaluation. All right. With that as a background, let's look at how value is created or destroyed in mergers and acquisitions. And as I said earlier, it's all the operations of the business that contribute to the success or lack of success in M&A. But as we'll explore here, order to cash is one of the most important. Because remember, orders need to be processed. So let's say you just completed an acquisition and June 1st, you're going to start operating as a combined company. Well, on June 1st, incoming orders need to be processed accurately, promptly, and fulfilled quickly, and accurate invoices need to be sent out on June 1st. No ramp up here. Accounts receivable need to be collected, and 99+% of them at or close to the payment terms, including inherited AR. What is inherited AR? Well, when the acquired company is merged into the acquirer or the acquiring company, typically the collection staff and a lot of the other staff of the acquired company is not part of the combined company. They don't want to transfer, headcount reductions or cost savings, et cetera, et cetera. And the inherited AR, that is the AR that was open at the time of acquisition, is now being handled by a new set of collectors. There's a lot of customer knowledge lost in that. And that has proven to be especially hard to collect. And the other thing that makes AR collections difficult is the attrition of the acquired staff. And, just my personal experience in consulting, about 1/3 of the projects that I did, 1/3 of the total, were to help clients recover from post-integration cash flow and AR problems. That's a pretty high proportion. Now, here's some examples. If I chuckle, it's, wasn't funny for these companies, but just shows how difficult it can be and how damaging it can be if these integrations of order to cash don't go well. Medical device manufacturer, when they combined with their acquired company, they saw the total AR go up 22% in just a few months. And worse, the over 90 past due went from 7 to 19 million. So it almost tripled. So clearly something was not working well there. Another example is a supplier of scientific equipment had its over 150 day. Now, 150 days past due. That's pretty old, and that's really into the danger zone of not ever collecting a lot of that money. Well, that over 150 past due AR tripled, 16 to 48 million in 6 months. Integrating an acquired company in the same industry. So you think, well, same industry, they know the customers, they know the business. Should have gone a little easier, a little better. And then the worst example, an insurance company we worked with, they implemented a new ERP system while integrating an acquired company. And you say, well, gee, that wasn't very smart. It was taking on too much at the same time. Well, that new ERP system was critical to the operation of the combined company. But implementation difficulties prevented them from invoicing for 2 months. It's a long time, 2 months. And of course, when they finally got the invoices out, most of that revenue was paid late. By definition, it was paid late. And actually, a substantial portion was never paid. It just couldn't, that initial slip up proved to be damaging. So here's 3 examples of value destruction in M&A deriving from the order to cash process. Here's a graphic representation of that scientific equipment company. The AR over 150. If you look at the horizontal axis, you see the letter I there at the far left, 16 million. That's when the integration started. You can see in 6 months, it went up to 48 million. It took 4 months to bring it back down to 16 million. And of course, we continued the effort to drive it down to more acceptable levels. And this was a big effort. This was an expensive effort. It took a lot of extra people. There were write-offs too. I mean, it was kind of a tough road, but goes to show you what can happen. And once it goes bad, it's difficult and slow and expensive to correct. All right. So that's some examples of what can happen when the O2C processes are not well integrated and coordinated for the combined company. And even Deloitte in their study listed kind of the perils of integrating acquisitions and what can go wrong. And these 4 are dependent on the order to cash process. And the 4 imperatives that you need to have. Well, increase sales at acceptable margins. I mean, that was probably the major rationale for the acquisition. So if your startup of the combined company loses orders, loses control of pricing, and there's excessive revenue leakage from returns, unauthorized discounts, lots of deductions, that's going to affect those sales and strongly affect those margins. Negative customer experiences must be minimized, of course. Customer submits an order, gets lost in the shuffle, they never get it. That's a negative customer experience. Maybe they'll let 1 or 2 go by, but if it continues, they're going to start, 1, they're going to be unhappy, and 2, they're going to start looking for another supplier. Cost structure has to be optimized. When you look at the financial justification for mergers and acquisitions, there's always, the upside. The revenue is going to go up, going to strengthen the margin, and that delivers a lot of profit. But there's also the efficiency side. Combining these companies, we're going to reap lots of synergies and reduce costs a lot. Great. But particularly in the early going of an integration, you want to optimize costs, but you got to be careful you don't reduce it too much, particularly in those customer-facing operations. And then finally, a strong cash flow has to be delivered. There's going to, in a integration, 2 companies, there's going to be many one-time expenditures. Ideally, management would like to pay for those with ongoing cash flow and not borrowing. So order to cash functions, particularly credit, collections, dispute resolution, need to be up and running near full effectiveness very, very soon. And when we look at these impacts here, there's not much margin for shortfall in these factors. All right. So where does automation come in? How can automation help in this integration of two companies? Well, a couple facts to consider. One, the O2C workload of the combined company is going to increase a lot, right? I mean, you're bringing in a whole company's worth of sales and transactions. But remember, the business case always includes significant cost reduction, which, you know, is staff reduction, right? There'll also be substantial attrition. There'll be some new hires. So what's that post-combination environment gonna look like? Well, substantially higher workload, fewer staff, and a number of those new staff are going to be new on the learning curve. So how do you counteract that? Well, you can add a whole lot of people temporarily and bring them down as time goes on. Or you can plan for the future and implement a permanent solution with automation. As I mentioned before, on most order-to-cash functions, there's an urgent need to hit the ground running. These four I've singled out as most important. And clearly, you can see where a shortfall, a lagging behind, can really impact your operations. Credit vetting. We didn't have time to check them out. Just give them a credit limit. 9 months later, they go bankrupt. Collections, need that cash to come in. Dispute and deduction resolution. If they're not resolved, they build up, and then boom, big write-off. Cash application, important to keep your customers' records straight. And we've seen several examples where the cash application got off track, either with huge amounts of unapplied cash or worse, significant amounts of misapplied cash. Unraveling that costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, and causes significant customer aggregation. So what's the solution? Well, one solution, very practical solution, is automation. But artificial intelligence-driven automation, which can automate 70–90% of manual operations in these 4 O2C sub-processes. 70–90%. Now that's 70–90% of a totally manual operation. So if you're partially automated, semi-automated, maybe it's 30–40%, but still a huge improvement. And you need that to keep up with the new environment here of much higher volume, proportionally smaller staffing, many of whom are on the learning curve. It's a necessity. So let's look at AI-driven automation in these 4 critical O2C processes. Credit risk management. As I said, if you just say, well, we're not going to be in a position to really do good credit vetting for 2 or 3 months. We'll just kind of let them go through and hope for the best. Well, in those 2 or 3 months, you could be building some big bad debt write-offs. So what can the automation do? Well, it can automate most of the manual, semi-manual gathering of information required to set a credit limit. And first of all, presents to the customer an online credit app, which they can complete and submit with a digital signature. It can automate the gathering of the inputs from your credit bureau data, verifying legal tax status, your vendor references, that sort of thing, and do automatically a credit scoring, which then that score combined with the estimated monthly purchases can derive a recommended credit limit, which of course will have to be reviewed by a human being, credit manager. But when you think of credit investigation, the vast majority of the work time and elapsed time occurs in gathering that information. Once it's all gathered and you put it in front of a trained, experienced credit manager, a lot of times that credit limit can be derived in 10 or 15 minutes. So by automating the compilation and accumulation of the data, you tremendously streamline and improve the productivity in credit risk management. Collections. Well, this is a little tougher, you know. I mean, there's nothing better than a collection call, voice to voice. And to help that, the automation can help document your collection strategy, compile a prioritized task list, meaning for each collector, this is who you call first, second, third, fourth, etc., etc., etc. Therefore, your collection effort is being focused on the highest yield customers. Avoid bad debt, generate cash, whatever. And of course, all this information is provided on a collector workbench. So when that collector sits down, they've got all the resources and information they need. And then the other nice thing that AI automated collections can do, which wasn't possible in the past, is with dunning. I mean, we're all familiar with dunning letters, dunning emails. But now what's been added here is an interactive feature to the dunning emails. Dunning email goes out, our records show you have $12,000, that's over 10 days past due. Can we expect payment this week? And a certain number of those customers are just going to delete it and ignore it. Or some will say, yeah, we'll get it paid this week, or we'll get it paid next week. And others will just say, no, can't pay it this week. So then this is where the interactive part comes in. The AI assistant says, all right, can you pay it next week? No. Can you pay it? Well, then it refers it to a collector. But along the way, a certain percentage of the customers are going to say yes, in which case your AI digital assistant sets up a promise to pay in your collection system. And you have covered the small and medium-sized accounts that need a collection contact, but you never really had time to contact before with your limited staff of collectors. So you can really get 100% portfolio coverage, which is rare, and it's a more effective dunning. Deduction resolution. Where does the automation come here? Well, in summary, at the start of the process and the end of the process, that can be automated. The actual researching the deduction, deciding whether the customer is right or wrong, and whether or not to issue a credit or to pursue collections, still requires human being and your deductions team. But the upfront work, creating deduction, routing it, and the end work of executing the result, like issuing a credit memo, which is the outcome 95% of the time or more, can all be automated. So again, big cost savings. Cash App. AutoCash has been around for decades now. But where the new automation improves it is much better in reading the remit advice, taking that information, putting it in a file, which then can be run through your AutoCash engine. Automatically creates deductions and can automatically execute the small balance write-offs. When you think of Cash App, in its totally manual form, the vast majority of the work is reading the remit advice and keying it in. Well, that can all be, 95% of it can be automated. Big savings there, big savings, big improvement in productivity. So, I kind of gave you some horror stories earlier. Here's the more successful story of a client that had grown through acquisition. Global, many countries, many currencies, many local banking systems. And they implemented this automation of which we just spoke. And the results were pretty striking. First of all, the deduction cycle time was reduced to 5 days. That's excellent. Auto cash went from 50 to 80%. Again, another huge increase. And 80%, well, gee, that's okay. It's not great. But if you're working in 30 countries, different currencies, different languages, different banking systems, 80% is pretty good. And with the 100% portfolio coverage in the interactive dunning, a DSO was pushed down 7%. So what are the benefits? Well, we've been mentioning them all along. But here's a recap. The most important one is the avoidance of a disaster, meaning a severe drop in cash flow and a large write-off of the acquired AR. And that was very, very common with the clients I worked with. They acquired so much AR, ended up writing off 10, 15, 20% of it, which they hadn't budgeted for, by the way. Then, of course, cost savings, productivity, efficiency improvements, better customer experience. Remember, Deloitte said, avoid those negative customer experiences. Well, this automation will help you do that. And of course, the increased cash flow. Kind of went through this a little fast, but what are the conclusions I'd like you to take away from today? One, O2C functions play a major role in the success or underperformance of integrating acquisitions. A much higher role than you might think. And the need is unrelenting. They need to be up and running very well, very, very quickly. And when you think of the post-combination environment, many of your O2C departments are going to have vastly increased workloads, proportionally decreased resources. And to our way of thinking, that makes automation an absolute necessity. Your questions?
Thank you, John. It's very interesting. We have a few questions from participants now. The first question is, why are O2C operations so important to the success or underperformance of a merger or an acquisition?
Well, because they're on the front line in dealing with the customer, and they process sales. I mean, your sales group creates the orders, but then fulfilling those orders and billing for them are within the O2C process responsibility. And any drop in efficiency, accuracy, slowness shows up pretty quickly in pretty significant impacts to revenue and cash flow. Very important.
All right. We have second question. Why is automation of O2C functions so important to post-combination operations?
It's remember what the new environment is. Greatly increased workload, proportionally smaller staff, decent percentage of them are new, and kind of everyone's on a learning curve. Yet the customers and the competition, they don't care. They want what they want right now.
All right. The final question we have today is, John, how much can a poor integration of O2C operations impact a company?
Well, tremendously. You saw the case studies that I selected. Those are some pretty devastating impacts. And I expressed some of those impacts in terms of past due AR, how it went up and how it came down. But the truth of the matter is, one of the contributors to reducing the seriously past due was writing them off. I mean, that's a direct hit to profit. That's where it gets very important to the post-merger and acquisition performance.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Those are the questions we have for today. And thank you everyone for joining the session. If you have any questions or comments about the session, please let us know in the chat box or write to us at info@emagia.com. And we are having our next masterclass on 9th June, the same time, that is 8 a.m. Pacific. The topic we're going to cover on that is digital world-class performance of O2C shared services. So have a good day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. And please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to submit them.
Thank you, John.